so excited to talk to you all about this. I'm going to jump, if I may, right in with a story that happened to an anonymous person that I shall not name. And what happened was this person was one day going through the internet, going through social media, and they saw that like, hey, the Node.js project is looking for somebody to work on a good first issue. We've heard of good first issues, right? Like you look on GitHub and like, oh yeah, this is a good first issue and all that. And this person's like, hey, I'm getting started. Like this is something I can do. I'm going to go on my laptop right away, this person says. And very quickly, and this was like an issue to work on an aspect of the Node.js website. I think they told me this happened like 6 or 7 years ago or something like this. And what happened was this person very quickly started just hitting some roadblocks. And I don't know if this has happened to y'all, but like this person shared these questions with me that they felt something like, oh, I can't really tell. What if somebody's already working on this and I'm going to step on their toes? Or what's the most polite or like not overbearing way to, say like, hey, I'd love to work on this, but I don't want to, feel silly doing so. What if, like, it turns out that I'm in way over my head and this issue is really complicated, I'm taking too long, and like the project's being blocked, I see some nodding, is like some relating. Or worse, what if I finally put in my pull request and it's no good and I'm told that my code is terrible and that I should go away? And so what happened was, turns out I just never really did anything and I never worked on that issue. Oh, sorry, yeah, I was lying to you. I misled you, my friends. That was me. And I'm going to use that to segue into my intro slide. Hi, my name's Ramón. I'm originally from Chile, but I live in Vienna in Austria, so I'm very happy to be here in Vilnius for the first time. I'm having the most wonderful time. I co-founded with my dear friend Jess, we co-founded the Bad Website Club, which is a developer education initiative to help motivate folks to get out of that sort of like tendency towards being like, oh, I don't know if I want to put my stuff online. Like, what if my website is silly or bad and all that? And so like, we just make bad websites and have a good time doing so. And as you might be able to tell, I think for me, this aspect of being able to get out there and just like put yourself out there and like, even though like you might make some mistakes or just like, you might learn some stuff along the way, we all go through this, no matter how long we've been in this industry. And so what I want to talk to you about today is how I and some techniques that I've picked up for contributing to open source in ways that we might think are unusual. And we see this question pop up a lot, especially I found that during the height of the pandemic, we've seen a lot of people being like, cool, you should do open source, it'll get you a job, your first job, it'll change your life and all this stuff. And I don't want to talk about that specifically today. There are some really fantastic guides on how to get started in open source. This one's from GitHub, and I didn't know about it until working on this presentation and talking to folks. They have an open source guide for precisely talking about how to get started in contributing to open source projects. There's also initiatives like opensauce.pizza, which I also highly recommend, is a place for getting your leg up in open source contributions. And in order to talk about this and how I got started and what are some ways to do so, well, I won't spoil it yet. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background and how I got started in open source. And to do that, we're going to have to go back many, many years. I don't want to say how old I am. Maybe I will, because I want to check. Does anybody know the editor Atom from GitHub? Yeah? So before VS Code basically took over everything, GitHub had this coding editor called Atom. And I think it's what introduced Electron, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And it was super fun, really nice, and I was working as a freelance software developer in Vienna, and I was just looking around, just like, inspired by a presentation that I had seen at a conference about Atom, and I was primarily doing Ruby on Rails at the time, and I found a plugin for Atom that allows you to run your unit tests, like a unit test runner for Atom. And I believe, I could be mistaken, that plugin was written in CoffeeScript. Again, I'm aging myself, and I apologize in advance. So I was like super inspired. There was an issue where like they wanted to have it so that as the output of your tests came out, it would scroll down automatically. It didn't do that at the time. And I sent in a pull request, trying my best to do so. And this is my first ever pull request to an open source project. And the person who developed this plugin was extremely kind and said, listen, thank you so much for your pull request. I'm not going to be merging it because what you've done with this is unlock a way that I've been wanting to do it that would, go a different direction. This person was extremely kind about it, gave me some really good feedback about not only like what they wanted to do, but also how I could improve for my contributions for the future. And they were extremely kind about it, but like, nevertheless, I was still like, oh no, I made a fool of myself. And I kind of left it alone for a while. And but I said, I was working as a freelancer and I love it, but I started feeling a little bit isolated. I wasn't working in teams. So I started checking out the meetup scene. And I said, I was a Ruby on Rails developer. And by meeting some marvelous people, I got introduced to some initiatives that happened to be open source. Have you all heard of Rails Girls? It's a program for getting underrepresented folks into Ruby on Rails via a one-day workshop. And I volunteered to go be a coach. I volunteered to go be a mentor. I started making little wording improvements in the tutorials. I know really well how to install Rails on Windows now. Which, yeah, I saw some smiles that are like, oh yeah, I know that. But through that, even though I wasn't writing code, I realized, hey, I'm contributing to an open source environment. Then I discovered Rails Girls Summer of Code, which is quite possibly my favorite thing I've ever worked in, where I started out, which by the way was a crowd-funded initiative to have underrepresented folks around the world get paid to work in open source for 3 months. And they were contributing not just to Rails, I'm talking like Django, the Django project, the Rust editor, the Rust browser engine, whose name I can't remember, but it was something. And it was incredible. And so I started out as a coach, but after a while and talking to the folks there, I started being an organizer. I started working through applications. I started working on documentation, communication. And then I was contributing code, and that's kind of how I started going into that. In 2018, I organized my first big conference. Of course, not just by myself in a team. I was part of a team. We brought the European Ruby conference to Vienna, which in of itself, and I'm going to argue this, and this is something you're going to see be a prevalent message across this entire presentation, this is contributing to the general Rails open source project, because I'm bringing people together, having these conversations, and having folks propel their open source contributions forward. So I think this is extremely valuable work. 2 years ago, my friend Jess and I started running boot camps based on Free Code Camp. Do we know Free Code Camp? It's one of my favorite platforms for getting started with programming, and we would do boot camps where we would work through the certifications with folks online. And I'm talking okay, you know what? I am going to brag because I'm on stage. Over 30,000 people have learned through us in these boot camps. It's just something that's so staggeringly powerful. And I've actually, by accident, I'm going to share this story in a bit, been doing contributions to the Free Code Camp ecosystem. Again, not through code. Eventually, I landed in Distribute-Aid, which I'm going to geek out about because I love Distribute-Aid so much. Excuse me for 1 sec. So Distribute-Aid kind of reset my mind when I think about open source, because humanitarian aid, enablement, and distribution and logistics, but all of their platform, everything they do is open source. So it's not just code, but it's an initiative, a platform. Copy us. We'll just enable you. And I've been working with them for 2 years, and it's been incredible. So I want to push back a little bit about what we think of when we talk about contributing, because when we think about contributing, we think of these, the GitHub squares, right? We think of these, we think of commits. I have no idea what I was working on here. I went into my GitHub history and I was like, yeah, random screenshot, it's fine. I guess some React. Well begun is half done. I'm really bad at commit messages. I need to get better. But what I want to talk about today is not how to contribute code, but how to contribute non-code. And you might be thinking, cool, what's that? And of course, any contributions that don't involve code. It sounds kind of self-explanatory, but what I really want to get into, because I would like to improve on that name, non-code contributions, because I think non-code contributions are some of the most important parts of an open source project. And you might be thinking, okay, cool, non-code contributions. I'm a software developer. Why should I do that? And now I'm going to do that thing, like where they say the name of the book or the movie in the middle of the book or the movie. I'm going to bring up my essential slide because there's more to open source than code. And like what I'm trying to do here is elaborate on going beyond code in open source. You might be thinking, why? And I want to just share with you, if I may, just a couple things about where I think an open source project lives. Because when we think of an open source project, I'm really bad at art, but like, bear with me, please. You've got your code. You've got the community around that code. But I think the most important part that we sometimes overlook is where that open source project fits in the general open source ecosystem. Because at the end of the day, we are all contributing towards better software development. But I didn't really say why, did I? So there's 3 reasons that helped me, and I'd love to hear from you later on, perhaps catch me in the hallway. What are your reasons for wanting to contribute beyond code? And for me, the most important one, believe it or not, I know I'm on stage right now, I'm a very shy person, to this day. And I found that by getting to know people and like seeing those people who we see on stage as like superstars or superheroes, it's easy to forget that they're human beings as well. And you can relate with them, you can talk to them. Believe it or not, by making contributions that go beyond code, maintainers are human beings, as I said, they can't do everything in that open source project. So you're helping that project thrive. By trying to contribute to an open source project, you're going to hit some roadblocks. And in a very like campsite, leave it cleaner than how you found it kind of way, you're making it easier for future contributors to come in and contribute to that project. And going back to that whole like shyness thing, it's such a wonderful way to meet people and grow your community. And, I think networking gets a bad rap. Because when you think of networking, especially like in the olden days, you think of like, 2 stuffy business people like exchanging business cards. But what we're doing now is networking. What we're doing in the hallway, what we're doing in a conference is networking. And I think that this is a wonderful way to do that. So in this presentation, I'm going to go through some ways that have helped me contribute to open source projects that go beyond code. So let's get the first one out of the way, because we all think of documentation, right? We're all like, well, yeah, that's the most obvious one. And yes, it's obvious, but it's also so important. Just for example, like we have here at Distributed, how can somebody get started with developing with your software? And this isn't just a README on GitHub. Sometimes these go outside of a README. For example, Free Code Camp has their own contribution guide. Fun story, I've made a contribution to this because I was live streaming how to set up Free Code Camp in Docker, and I was reading through it, and I guess I can say literally tripped over a typo. Because I was reading out loud, because I get anxious on the stream. I was like, well, I don't want to be boring, I'm just going to read out loud. And I found a typo, and I fixed it live, and it was fantastic. And they were so kind. Let's stay on the topic of writing for a second. Blogging. But you know how I was saying, like, by going to conferences and having these conversations, you're still contributing to the ecosystem of a project. And yes, this is absolutely doing so. I mean, like, how many blog posts do we see where we're like, oh, how do I do this thing? And like, insert framework of choice. People are taking the time, and you can do this too. Write your experiences, put them out there. Yes, you're not getting green squares. We'll get to that in a minute. Same goes for trying stuff out. A lot of these READMEs have been written ages ago. They have their own systems. Most people are, not to generalize, but they're probably working on like Mac OS or Linux or something. At the time of writing, or at the time that I was like really starting to think about contributions beyond code, I was working in Windows subsystem for Linux. Do you all know that? Like that Linux environment inside Windows? It breaks a lot. And a lot of people are like, oh, wow, I never thought people were using that. I was like, yeah, they do. We exist. And by tripping these things up and being like, hey, I found that this doesn't quite work. I think I fixed it by doing that. What you're doing is contributing to that ecosystem. And that can then go into, say, an FAQ. Let's talk about issue triage. I love the word triage. I've only ever seen it in the context of issues. If you're not familiar with the word, it essentially means managing. Like, especially with like larger open source projects, they get a lot of issues. And oftentimes, maintainers are overwhelmed by them. Sometimes they get super old. Sometimes people claim them and they never make a contribution. And a lot of the time, you can help by being like, hey, I saw that this is still open. Does it still need doing? And then that's sort of like a reminder for the maintainer to be like, crap, my bad. We should close that. And actually, check it out. Kubernetes, we know Kubernetes, right? They have guides for issue triage, and they invite this. How powerful that you can do this. Again, you're not writing code, but you're still helping out. There's this incredible platform called Code Triage that lets you do just that. Find projects that need help with issue triage. I know that this is about beyond code, but I would still argue that helping out with code reviews is another fantastic way beyond code to contribute to a project. I always come back to this pull request. That is, don't look at the date. It's very old. I'm sorry. Where Max here came in and said, hey, can I give you some feedback on your code? And I'm like, yeah, of course. This was a life-changing code review for me. This person doesn't even work all that actively in that project, but he came in and still helped me out, making things better for myself, for him, and the project. How much time has Stack Overflow saved us? By folks taking the time to just be like, you know what? I've broken stuff in Docker before, let me help you out. Yes, you're not making code contributions, but you're still contributing to an open source ecosystem. Because how many of us go to Stack Overflow for this? This is open source. Same goes for asking questions, by the way. I would very much argue, I love asking questions, and I think we should do it more. I should really give you all a link to a blog post I wrote about how to ask for help. But I think asking for help is such a difficult thing. Okay, I'm terrible at asking for help. I find that people tend to fall into one of two categories. One is the person who asks for help too quickly, and the other one's the one who never asks for help. And I'm definitely in the latter because I'm scared. But having a heuristic for asking for help, or even asking questions, we're all familiar with the bystander effect by any chance? When you have a large group of people, sometimes people don't ask questions out of fear of losing face. Having the bravery and the privilege to go and ask those questions is extremely important, especially in an international context. English, being the de facto programming world language, is incredible, but English, I'm from Chile, most of your documentation is going to be more helpful if it's in Spanish. Doing this, contributing to these projects by taking, say, an article like this and being like, hey, how could I use CSS container queries? Look at the screenshot from MDN. And no shade on MDN, by the way. It's a giant resource. And I love MDN to bits. Isn't it funny that only the table of contents is in Spanish? But the rest, oh, hold on. No, it's in English as well. Sorry, I wasn't reading properly. Isn't it funny? But it's still kind of bits and bobs are half in English, half in Spanish. And this happens a lot. And by coming in and making these contributions, you make it easier for people to then, you're enabling people to come in and make those code contributions. Now, I'm talking a lot about stuff that we can do on the internet. What about in person? I love volunteering at conferences because I find that is the best way to build, not just build yourself up as a team member, but also to build up these events that enable this open source. We were talking about this earlier, like the conference that I organized. One of my favorite conferences in the world is Ruhr.js. It takes place in Germany. It is wonderful. And I remember I went there for the first time. I was kind of shy. And my friend Maddie, who's the organizer, just texted us being like, hey, does anybody want to MC? And I'm like, okay, I'll do it. MCing is, by the way, the incredible job that's being done here today, presenting speakers, which you'd think okay, but how is this open source? Because as I keep arguing, you're contributing to that ecosystem. And hey, if you've been volunteering for a while and you're like, I'd love to do this back home, then go do it. Go organize events. It doesn't even just, it doesn't have to be the scale of a conference. It could be a meetup. As I mentioned earlier, the Vienna Ruby meetup is where I got my footing in terms of community, and I still hold it dear to my heart. I still organize it, even though I've been going for oh my God, I'm old, 9 years. You can do this too. And if you're like, well, I don't even know where to get started. Okay, I don't have time to go back to my slides. Ask questions. Talk to folks. Doesn't even have to be meetups. It can be hackathons. One of my favorite projects I've ever worked on was from a hackathon. It was an open source project. This was during the refugee crisis in 2016, where we made a platform for helping volunteers find where they could help. After doing this hackathon, we handed it over to the city of Vienna. It's still used today. I haven't touched it since then. But by hosting and facilitating that hackathon, that person who facilitated it made it possible for open source to happen. That's so powerful. Something we do loads at Distribute8 as well. We do like little hackathons where people can come in and work on this. I want to encourage all of you to use your creativity to contribute to open source. I don't want to put people on the spot, but I know there's a couple of people here who do like wonderful pixel art, and this is such a big part of open source as well. I'd love to share a story, if I may, from when we were organizing Queer.js in Vienna. We had our first one there. You can see we have those like lovely logos of buildings and stuff. And oh, by the way, I have stickers from Queer.js if anybody wants. Come talk to me. And I remember I was like, you know what? I'm gonna make my first logo. I'm gonna learn Figma. And okay, so I don't have an eye for art. I'm trying to learn, and I started trying to make the Riesenrad, like the famous Ferris wheel from Vienna. And I'm making this, and I'm going through it, and it's so much work, and I'm like, oh my god, I'm terrible at this. And then like, and halfway through, my friend Sarah goes like, you know, I got these from an SVG website. You can do that too. And I was like, dang it. Look, I still maintain that this right here, some of my favorite work I've ever done. Didn't get used, doesn't matter. I still contributed to Queer.js, and I think that that's so valuable. I've been talking a lot about events as well. I'm doing it now. I'm contributing to open source. I've been doing it for years, and I love it. I do want to argue that if you don't want to give talks, you don't have to. And like a lot of the discourse goes around like, oh, you're only going to be successful if you're giving talks at conferences. Don't get me wrong. If you love it, do it. I'm going to plug my workshop tomorrow for getting started in public speaking, if anyone's interested. But you don't have to. It doesn't even have to be like talks in person. Especially at the height of the pandemic, making videos, educational content. People consume media, especially educational media, in different ways. Blog posts, videos. Actually, I'm going to share some of my favorite work I've done back when I was at CodeC during Hacktoberfest. Do we know Hacktoberfest? Yeah, it's a yearly initiative that used to be from DigitalOcean, or still is, I forget, for getting started and like encouraging folks to do a certain number of pull requests to projects. And so during that, for work, I had this kind of a silly idea. It was like, hey, Tamara, for example, who's a gem, by the way, I love her so much. I met her through this. She was like, hey, you've got this project that I've never worked on. Do you want to come on stream with me? And together, me never having looked at your code, you onboard me to your project, and we end up making a pull request. The name of the stream was Let's Onboard Ramon. That's why I'm wearing a little sailor outfit there, because you're onboarding me, and I'm silly, and I love a good prop. And it was incredible because like what we were doing was not only mixing our communities, not only making contributions to their project, which yes, technically is code, but like I think the contribution that goes beyond code is the fact that I'm showcasing, first of all, how to do really good onboarding, but also how to be a good pair programmer and all of this. And like, actually, I'm going to brag a little bit. Like I tried programming languages I had never touched before. I had never done Go before this. I have never done Python before this. I was a Ruby person. And it was still fun. And don't get me wrong, I made mistakes. It was fine. We had a good time. And that was on the internet. Let's talk about social media for a second. Everybody's favorite topic. A lot of open source projects do need to have a social media presence. And you can help with that by announcing new releases, new events, and all of this. This needs to be done. And this is absolutely a contribution you can make. Because at the end of the day, what we're sharing is content. Anybody here either write or subscribe to a newsletter? A couple hands. I love a newsletter. One of my favorite newsletters is called This Week in Rust. And what they do is every week, they just share a whole bunch of articles, videos, and calls for proposals to conferences. And I love this because you're contributing to the wider Rust ecosystem. Just like any other software, releases, timings, betas, all of this needs coordination. And oftentimes, maintainers need help with this. If they're looking, absolutely do consider helping out with that sort of like more logistical side of open source deployment. Having a community around it, we need people to keep us safe within our codes of conduct, within how we interact with one another. And nothing is stopping you from going into a Discord, for example, or like some kind of server where you're contributing often and being like, hey, do y'all need help with like moderating? Keep making sure that the rules are being kept. Or even mentoring. Helping someone out with their career so that they go on to make those open source contributions is something that's so powerful, and I have an open source resource for it. My friend Jessica runs these things called Open Advice One-on-Ones. And she just collected a bunch of advice on how to give good mentorship. It's such a powerful tool where we can just like, and you might think like, yeah, but that's on GitHub, it's kind of code, but like, Mom, really, it's just a write-up. So that's just a bunch of ways. I'm sorry, I've just like shared like a bunch of ways that you can contribute. What if you're a maintainer? What can I do to facilitate these contributions that go beyond code? I want to give some pieces of advice that have helped me in the past. First and foremost, be strategic. You might think, well, I've got an open source project, I'll just put a code of conduct that I copied from a website, boom, bam, boom, we're done. No, a code of conduct is only as good as it is enforced. Be deliberate, be impactful, be inclusive. We see a lot of like good first issues, and one thing that I love to do is to tag issues with a beyond code tag so that folks are encouraged to come in and be like, oh, I can make a logo for you. Remember the human being. And when I mean the human being, I mean the community, and I mean everyone. Maintainers, just like us, need rest, need resources, need time, all of this. People get busy. Let's be intentional about how we do that. But at the core of it, we still struggle. What do we do about those dang green squares? Why do we measure? I mean, beyond just saying, why do we measure our impact in green squares? What are some ways that we can do that without needing to rely on the green squares? And one thing that we do at Distributed that I really like is when somebody contributes, put your name in there, or we'll put it in for you if you want. And I love this, just giving acknowledgement where acknowledgement is due. There's even packages that do this for you automatically. I highly recommend them. All right, friends, I've been babbling for a while. I just want to give you some action items, some homework, if I may. And I want to encourage you to like be open to the idea of being like, you know what, this is kind of annoying. What if I could fix that? What if I could propose a solution? How do I do this in a way that I can encourage myself and others to come back and continue contributing? How do I practice good etiquette? Remember, maintainers are human beings. I don't know if many of us do have an open source project where we've had a question or a comment made or a pull request, and then like, I don't know, in a day they're like, hey, you haven't looked at my pull request. Have we been there? Yep, I see some nods. Also coworkers, not my words. Well, I'm a freelancer, I can say what I want. Anyway, I'm kidding. But how important it is to remember that these maintainers are human beings who also need time to review your stuff. The weekend, don't ping people on a Saturday. The most important that I want to add here is like, be intentional and be strategic. Know the impact that you have because it's important to do so. Here's a bunch of resources that I recommend that have made this presentation possible, but also go well beyond it and do so much better than I could. My slides are there too, if you all want to catch up on those. I highly recommend, by the way, reading this MDN article on open source etiquette. I find it really, really impactful and important. And if you all like books, has anybody read this book? Working in Public, The Making and Maintenance of Open Source Software. Nadia Egbel wrote this, I read it in 2021. It is fantastic. And now, as we end, I'm going to do that cheeky thing where I do a little plug, if I may. At Distribute Aid, we're kicking off a little program. Think of it like, Google Developer Experts or Microsoft MVP for open source. It's called Open Source Explorers. We're kicking off in January if y'all want to come hang and either help out as a mentor or come in and help out with any contributions that you might want to do that go beyond code, going towards humanitarian aid relief. Come talk to me if you're interested as well, because we're done here, and I want to hear from you what kind of things that you do that go beyond code. But we'll do that in the Q&A, so thank you, my friends.
Thank you very much. Do we have questions?
So you mentioned Netiquette and basically opening issues, etc.
Yeah.
How do you deal with maintainers that are sometimes abrasive, not really liking what you do?
That's an excellent question. So what do we do about maintainers that are perhaps abrasive, not very welcoming? Look, we're human beings. Our time is valuable. I'd say go to a different project. There's nothing more we can do. I think it's important to point that out. If you want to, if you have the energy to do so, to be like, hey, listen, you're not being very inclusive. I'll take, not my business, but I'll take my contributions elsewhere. Thank you very much. But that's a great question. And that's a side that we need to acknowledge as well. But I want to be very clear. If someone is abrasive to you when you're trying to contribute to an open source project, it is not on you. It is on them. Thank you.
Any other questions?
A comment, please. Ooh.
So you said a bunch of times you're old. Well, let me tell you.
I'm sorry. I need to stop doing that. I'm so sorry.
No. Let me finish.
Sorry.
Next year will be my 30th year speaking at conferences.
Amazing.
And I just wanted to share with everybody here that if I look back on my career, the single most best thing I ever did was to force myself to learn how to speak in front of people. Because at the time, I'd rather die, right? And now I travel the world speaking at conferences in front of 800,000 people more. And it's dramatically changed my life, not only my work life, but my personal life. So I'd like to encourage all of you, if you're not speaking, do it now. You won't regret it.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And congratulations.
Thank you very much. Whenever the presentations turns into discussions, it means it's very interesting and important topic, right? Do we have any other questions or remarks, or you want to share something? I believe it's a safe space to do that.
Oh, this.
I'm trying to formulate the question. So
Yeah.
how do you keep your morale up? For example, me at work,
Yeah.
not open source, but I also find things that need to be done, which are not code. And
Yeah.
I basically a software engineer without coding.
Yeah.
So how do you keep your morale? Sometimes you might feel that you need to write something, you need to code something to participate into the project, even though you're doing all the things that need to be done, and maybe just people who are focused extremely on coding don't want to do that.
Yeah. How do you manage that? How do you navigate that? Do you mean as a team or
As a person?
As a person?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Especially, I must admit, I have not worked much in a company where this was sort of needed. I was always mostly independent, so I did it in my own time, out of my love for the community. But when it comes to having to do things that go beyond code, I think it's important to remember that you can't do everything all at once. I try to manage my time in a way where if I'm stuck on something, I'm like, cool, I'm going to let that fester in my brain for a while I write a blog post, or while I make a video, or I'll talk to people. I'll talk to my team and unblock myself and be like, and maybe even delegate if possible. Hey, does anybody want to help me? For example, so I work primarily in developer relations. Something like public speaking is a reward task, something that a lot of people like doing. Why not give that to somebody so that they can go enjoy it? I've been speaking for a while myself, and it's something that I enjoy very much, But if you want to give that to somebody else and delegate to them and make their day and make this possible for them, I find really, like, this aspect of collaboration is what I find really important. I hope that's helpful. I'm glad.